Let's talk about an archaeological site called the Armstrong Mountain Fort. It's sometimes also called the Mount Carbon Stone Walls. It's a lesser known archaeological site. It appears to have been an ancient fortress or mountaintop lookout with stone walls, and it may relate to the Book of Mormon. It's located in West Virginia. Now, to share information about this site, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. The Armstrong Mountain Fort, or the Mount Carbon Stone Walls, are located in West Virginia. They're located along the Kanawha River. Now, in a previous video, I presented some information about the Kanawha River, how I think that it may relate to the Book of Mormon and the origination of the word Kanawha. It's spelled K-A-N-A-W-H-A, but it's pronounced Kanawha. And the Phoenicians called themselves the Kanani. The Kanawha River may relate to the Book of Mormon. The name may have a Phoenician type origin. But as we talk about the Armstrong Mountain Fort site, let's first just make a mention about the Kanawha River. The Kanawha River is very important for a couple of different reasons. One of those reasons is that it provides a pathway or easy passageway through the Appalachian Mountains. And because of that, it's geographically very important before modern times. Now, when the first settlers in America in Jamestown in 1607, as it shows here on the screen, they were in Virginia. They saw the mountains to the west. They learned from the Native Americans, and they learned about a river that would create a pass that has a pass through the mountains. The natives called it the Conoy River. So it was named for a small tribe that once dwelt there. They told the settlers how it flowed north, then northwest, and then eventually through the Western Mountains, and then eventually to the South Seas, which is the Gulf of Mexico. So they have the origination of the name for the Kanawha River, as it says there, Kanawha or Conoy, and to the pioneers, it was like a westward highway. I think that the Kanawha River may also have been important for the Native Americans in Book of Mormon timeframes, and was likely used as a pathway or passageway to get through the Appalachian Mountains, and I think that it may relate to the Book of Mormon. Now, talking a little bit more about it, so here is a map of the Kanawha River. Now, the Kanawha River is called in parts the New River. So the New River, and the Kanawha River are the same river. The New River flows north and then becomes the Kanawha, or is called the Kanawha when the Gauley River joins it. And it flows northwest to the Ohio River, which flows in west and then meets up with the Mississippi River. So that's the Kanawha River. And we'll look at the Armstrong Mountain site, which is along the Kanawha River. Okay, so switching now to Google Earth. This is the site that we'll look at. It's this mountain range here, which had a stone wall, which appears to have been a fortress or lookout, and that went around the top of this mountain. Now, it ended up being about 8 to 10 miles in length. I'm sorry, in total to get around it. It was about 3.5 miles from the top to the bottom, and it just kind of winds around about 300 feet from the summit of the mountain, about 1,200 feet above the river level. This is the Kanawha River, and it's flowing this direction to the northwest. The Gauley River recently joins it, and then it's this strategic site along this passageway through the mountains. Let me go ahead, since it's in Google Earth. So here's the site, and let me just back out so you can kind of see where it fits. So as you can see, the Kanawha River flowing up to the Ohio River, and then we back out. And this Kanawha River, New River, was a passageway through these Appalachian Mountains. And you see then the Great Lakes in the eastern United States. Okay. All right, so again, that's the site that we're looking at. It's up this mountain. This mountain is about, it gets up to about 1,700 feet high. Again, the walls were about 1,200 feet above the river level, a few hundred feet below the mountain peak. And then we'll talk about the site. Okay, so at the location, there's a marker that talks about the ancient works there, extensive prehistoric stone ruins with walls several miles long, enclosing a large area. And that's just a marker along the highway next to it. Now, the most interesting account of the walls that were there came from the late 1800s, and it was from a man, Dr. Buster, who in 1877, at that time, was an old man. His father was one of the very first white settlers in the area. And as a young man, he spoke a lot with the Native Americans. He explored the sites, and he gives a good account of what the site looked like at that time. So we're going to read, I'm going to show you portions of, his name was William Page. William Page's interview with Dr. Buster is what I should say. And then there's also some additions made by two men named Peters and Carden, who in 1926 also visited the site and added some information. And the pictures in it, unfortunately, aren't very good. I have a few better pictures, but I've taken out quotes from that, which are the most interesting parts of it, and I'll put them on the screen and I just go over them. As you'll see, it's very interesting. Now, the site has been tentatively put at Book of Mormon timeframes. One person estimated at 300 AD, others estimate that may be older than that. So it could be a Nephite, Lamanite time frame, or it could be older than that, more like a Jaredite time frame. Either one is a possibility there. Okay, so first we'll read about the interview of Dr. Buster in 1877. So as it says, Dr. Buster was one of the first white residents in the area, and at that time there had been no early settlers who had settled there. It had only been occupied by Native Americans. Now, in 1877, he was interviewed. He was a very old man at that time, but still with a very good, active mind. He talked about his explorations of the site and how he had talked with the Native American men about the site. And he says that, he discussed there in the area numerous relics and other things that were found. Now, he said that as for the stone walls and this sort of fortress or lookout at the top of the hill is called Armstrong Mountain, or it's also called Mount Carbon. There's two names given to it. So the Armstrong Mountain is one name for the mountain that it's on, and but it's also at times called Mount Carbon because there was coal mining done in that mountain. The mountain has coal in it, and they did some mining within the mountain. So it's also called Mount Carbon. They're called the Mount Carbon stone walls as well. But anyway, he said that the Native Americans knew of the monuments that he spoke with. They said that he said they claimed no part in them. He said they told them that their legend was that the Kanawha River Valley had been occupied by a fierce race of white warriors. Now, this is a man who's not a member of the church or anything like that, obviously, but this is just recounting the Native American legends about it. So he said that the Kanawha River Valley had been occupied by a fierce race of white warriors who successfully resisted the approach of the red man from the west for a long time, but had finally succumbed. Native Americans claimed that they have never occupied the Kanawha River Valley except for hunting expeditions, and that the stone walls and the fortress and everything was old when they first entered, and that the origin of it was beyond their records. Now, entering the wall, he said it follows the contour of the mountain about 300 feet below the summit, and just conforms to the contour of the mountain, and made a complete enclosure of what's about 3 miles in length. Like I said, the total wall of the length was never measured, but it's 8 or 10 miles. So though the distance, the area involved is about 8 or 10 miles. That's been since verified. Now, unfortunately, what's happened was some of the wall has been lost or fallen down over time. At this point, when archaeologists have gone, and looked at the site, they can no longer make a complete or identify the complete wall around it. They can only identify parts or gaps of the walls, but do seem to line up as if they once made a complete enclosure. Some of the portions of the wall have fallen down the slopes of the mountain. Some are on relatively steep slopes and have fallen down. The walls apparently were made just loose stones, and so not the kind that would last, and not fall down over time. I have over here for the walls. Okay, so this is a map that was done of what they've been able to identify of the walls. So this is a contour map. So each line sort of represents going up in elevation. As you go up, this is based off of sea level. So it's about over 2,000 feet above sea level, about 1,200 feet above the river. And so this is going up the mountain on the one side, then on the other side. And what they can find is they can find portions of the wall that, again, that looks like they all connected to make a large enclosure around the contours of the hill. And currently, though, there are gaps. So the pink, you see pink, and then you see gaps because it's no longer there. And then they identified that within the walls, there were some mounds and other earthworks. They identify also where flint sources were. So anyway, so that's what's remaining of the wall there. So it's going back to the account. So the total wall around at that time in the 1870s, Dr. Buster said that it did go all the way around. And he said that there was then a single cross wall at a narrow point, which divided it into two sections, kind of a north section and a south section. There was a spring in each of the two sections. So it was an ideal location in that it's way up a mountain, so hard to access or to be attacked. So it's a safe spot, perhaps a place of resort. But it also had the benefit of having access to fresh water because it had springs. It had two springs, and each one was then divided into the two enclosures. He said that one of the springs in particular was a good strong spring. The other one was smaller. But in the bigger spring, it was still at that point in 1877, it was a circular pool that it then created up at the top there, about 6 feet in diameter, 3 or 4 feet below the surface, and about 10 feet deep. And then near that, he said that there were two large circular heaps of stone. One of the accounts of this stone heap is that it was about 42 feet in diameter. What Dr. Buster felt was that the heaps of stone had been some kind of tower structure, stone tower, that had then kind of fallen down over time. He said that the circles were about 20 feet in diameter. He felt that they originally were some kind of tower structures with an original height of about 20 feet. The walls, he said, were constructed of loose stone. He couldn't see any kind of cement used with it. And like I said, along the steeper slopes of the mountain, the walls had fallen down already at that time and could only be traced at that time, he said, you could see some of the debris. He said that he estimated the height of the wall at 6 feet, but on a foundation of 6 to 8 feet. Now, subsequently, archaeologists have been there and they see parts that are smaller and parts that are bigger. They see parts of the walls that are only a couple feet high. They've seen parts that are maybe 5 feet high, but quite wide, up to 30 feet wide. And so what that raises the possibility is that maybe that was, higher at some point, and then just over time has fallen to where it's a 5 feet high and 30 some feet wide. I do have a picture over here of one of the archaeologists standing next to part of the stone wall. So as you can see, this was a large part of the stone wall. And now what they found is that in the stone wall, much of it are stones that are smaller and can be, piles of loose stones. They found some of them were quite big, though, and they estimated would need to be carried by several people. And some of them had to have been carried uphill. So that's quite an amount of work to carry some very heavy stones uphill for portions of the wall. Okay, so here, continuing with the account, Dr. Buster said that most of the loose stones seem to have been carried from up there near the top, but he also saw that the wall at times, okay, so there was a black flint source. Now, black flint, the Kanawha black flint, was used by Native Americans for tools and for weapons. So this site, in addition to being up high and safe from attack in that sense, also, and it had the springs, it also had a weapons making or tool making source, black flint. Some of it was within the walls. There was a part of the black flint ledge outside of the walls, and they saw that material from that had been carried up the hill. And so he says it carried up the hill. Now, among the other things pointing to the antiquity, he said, this was again in the 1800s, that at that time there were huge trees up there, some exceeding 5 feet in diameter with hundreds of years of growth. And some of these trees that showed hundreds of years of growth were underneath and had sprouted since the foundation of the wall. And you could see that how they had lifted up the stones with their growth. So he knew from that time that it was at least several hundred years old. Archaeologists, again, since have estimated either 300, one said 300 AD is his estimate, others said that it could be older. Okay, and then when the walls going around the top, near the top of this mountain, there were parts where it would be at a cliff or a really steep slope. And he says there, what they would do is they would have the wall go to sort of the bottom of the cliff, and they would seem to use the cliff as part of, in effect, a wall. And so he said this indicated an object to guard against people from coming in rather than to keep people from coming out or escaping. Okay. Now, in 1926, Peters and Carden went and they added some additional information. And again, all of this was before the mining that was done in 1960s, which sounds like it caused the falling apart of some of the walls after that. But anyway, in 1926, he points out that this location along the Kanawha River was also near a spot at the Kanawha River where there had been some kind of high level of occupancy, because they said that the whole area is filled with bones and implements. Now, he went up, Peters and Carden, they went up to the site, and at that time, they found in the site bits of charcoal, slag from melted sand. Now, I've done a separate video on the use of iron at Hopewell sites, and how many felt like the mainstream understanding is that the Hopewell did not have the ability to make iron or anything like that. One of the pieces of evidence that has been found is that showing that they did have that technology was that they had these furnaces, and the furnaces would get so hot that they would melt some of the sand or other things and create the slag, and they would found those near sites where they were finding some iron. So they found some evidence of iron making. Again, that's a separate video that I have. At this site, they did not find iron pieces, but they did find slag there. They also had various tools, flint, spears, arrowheads, so forth. And he also says a lot of, I don't know how to pronounce that word, quoit-shaped stones. I looked up the definition of this, and this is kind of a disc or discus type shape, can be a ring. So these kind of round stones. And what they realized is that many of these stones they appeared to be used as weights. They had marks on them, and that many of the stones were exact multiples of others in terms of weight. And actually, so that's an interesting possibility of a find that could relate to, for example, in the Book of Mormon in Alma chapter 11, it talks about the coinage and weights and the sort of the measurement systems that they use for the coinage. This could indicate a use of weights that could fit the Book of Mormon there. But anyway, and then he talked about how the arrowheads were very sharp and some of the best types of workmanship he's seen of those things. He also said that in the center of the large enclosure, there was a big stone, and they thought maybe that was used as a throne or perhaps as an altar. And that they also found that what Dr. Buster had thought there were two spots that he thought were towers, fallen down towers of stones. They discovered that one of those actually seemed to be covering a cave. And I have a picture that was drawn of that to this here. So apparently the stones had, and this was unclear. It says Fayette County. It appears to have been the same site. This was in 1894, a description, and basically showed that there was a cavity in there, and that inside it was actually 6 foot 8 feet high, and it seemed to relate to what they thought was a well, and turned out to be a spring. Okay, finishing up. And then within 10 miles of there was another site too at Paint Creek, and it has a wall up on a hilltop. And also near that, there's a burying grounds, and they said just extensive for the number of people and the things that were found there. Okay, so those are the accounts that were earlier accounts. Now, subsequent archaeological research has continued. The more recent visits to it, like I said, they said they have not been able to confirm that the wall went all the way around. They've only been able to confirm the parts, although it looks like it may have gone all the way around. And then there's been discussion about what the site was used for. Now, one of the things about the site is it has an excellent view up and down the river. You can see up and down the river for miles, apparently. And so it would have been a good lookout location, especially if there were towers that were built up at the top, with the Kanawha River being used like a pathway or a one easy pathway or passageway through the hills and mountains wilderness there. It would have been a good location to have people see the comings and goings. There's been discussion also about it as a fortification. I see it as a likely fortification, but many of the archaeologists that have looked at it said, well, the way that the stone walls were built with loose stones, they don't think is the most effective way to build a fortification. So some of the views are that it was not a fortification. Okay, just a couple of more things to share. So in 1970, there was an evaluation of the site done, and they were talked about how some of the walls had been accidentally ruined by some of the mining in the area. Apparently the miners knew that there was a wall. They were supposed to avoid a wall. They didn't recognize some of the loose stones as being walls. And then just some of the activity caused parts of the walls to be destroyed. So there was a meeting about that, an evaluation of the site. And here, this is one where they estimated the site to be built around 300 AD. And they estimated it as about a 10-mile total enclosure. And talked about how some of the stones had to be carried up the mountain. But they didn't think it was a fortification. Okay, and that mostly finishes up again the pictures up the wall, pictures of the stone mounds that were up there, and then the wall shape. There was the flint, as I said, was quarried near there. There were a couple of mounds up there, and that's about what we know of the site. So I'll go ahead and stop the share there. Okay, so in summary, I think that the Armstrong Mountain Fort, also called the Mount Carbon Stone Walls, do relate to the Book of Mormon. I think that they relate to the Book of Mormon because of the evidence about the dates. The 300 AD does fit a time frame of the Book of Mormon where there would have been war. I do think it was a fortification, if not a fortification, at least a lookout that was used because of the strategic location in terms of the pathway through the Appalachian Mountains. It would be the easiest way for those who would have been on the East Coast or in the South to head towards Ohio and back and forth, would be to go through that location. Otherwise, that terrain is very rugged and difficult to cross. It's very mountainy, very difficult to cross. You really need to use the Kanawha River Valley to pass through that easily. Now, there are a couple other passes way to the north and maybe in Kentucky, but for a long ways, this is the passageway that would go through. So it would be an ideal location for a fortification strategically for people who are at war. So I do think that it was built as sort of a last resort type site, as a lookout site along there, and I do think that the Kanawha River Valley was a strategic site for people at that time frame in the Book of Mormon. All right, so that's the information I have about that site. If you have any other information or have comments or questions, let me know. If you like the material, I hope you'll subscribe and hit the like button and the notification bell so you can get more information. Thanks.